Meetup group. We are a global community that's focused on bridging Japanese and American technology ecosystems. I'm Jennifer. I'm one of the organizers of this meetup group. Masa, who's also on video, is also here with us from Osaka. If you want to say hi, Masa.
Hi, I'm Masa. I'll probably have my intro later with everyone. Yeah.
So this is like literally one of the really good perks of having a webinar online. We found like more people can join us from abroad. Okay, is the deck going? Sorry.
Yep. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, it's okay. Yeah, switch to the next step. So please take a moment to show your face and tell us your name. We have Jen, who I see is on video. If you want to go first.
Yeah, together we're J squared, haha. I'm based in Brooklyn. I love all things tech, and better yet, if it's connected to food in any way, I'm like shoving Japanese Kit Kats in my face because I was recently in Japan. But yeah, good to be with you all and looking forward to the session with Jordan.
Yeah. Oh, I guess Jordan should also say hi, right?
Hello. Hey guys. I'm sure I'll talk more later.
Cool. Anybody want to show us your face and say hello? Anybody? Okay, maybe as we get going, more people will show us their face. Okay, this is how you can find us. We have our own website, japanstartups.org, and Twitter and Facebook page. Please subscribe to our quarterly newsletter at japanstartups.org. And we're really grateful that we have a sponsor of Telnet, and Telnet was actually founded in Japan in 1994. Masa, if you could hit me, please, so they know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
Okay. And so, they have been in the customer service industries for over 25 years. They've supported many companies as they've scaled up from startup phase to international brands. So if you want to learn more about them, you can contact Parker, the CEO, directly. So our agenda for today is quite simple. Jordan Fisher, who is a co-founder and CEO of Zehitomo, and he's going to be talking about the birth and growth of his company, followed by a Q&A with him, and we will have community announcements later and a close up as usual. And so the next part, we are switching over to Jordan, I believe.
Okay, let me switch screen.
Oh, wow, everyone is on video now. I didn't realize.
Mm-hmm. John? Oh, am I still sharing?
Nope, should I go ahead?
Yep.
All right, good morning for anyone in Tokyo, and good evening to probably most people who are in New York. Great to be with you. I'm Jordan Fisher. I was born and raised in New York until I was 18. So it's great to be kind of part of this bicultural experience and representing both from New York and from Tokyo. I've been out here for around 12 years since 2008. I majored in computer science in California. And then while all my friends went off to Silicon Valley, I was the weird one to come out to Japan in 2008 amidst the financial crash and work in finance for around 8 years before starting Zehitomo about 4 years ago. So I'll give a very brief overview, just kind of what we do as a business. I don't really want to spend too much time on that, more kind of, answering people's questions or seeing if I can provide value in different ways. Looking forward to this session. So, can you guys see my screen? All right, cool. So, hi again. Let's see. So just a brief overview. So we launched Zehitomo about 3 years ago. We've raised around equivalent of US 13 million since then. I was just talking to Jen, who I guess was from 500. So 500 now Coral Capital in Japan. It's actually our first investor that kind of led our seed and Series A. We're around 35 people right now as an organization, and we're just kind of entering our growth phase with around 4 people joining a month the last couple months, and us trying to ramp that up right now. So before I go into our business, just want to give some background on Japan. I think a lot of people here are interested in Japan in some sense. So maybe a lot of this is, something that everybody knows. But for anyone who's visited Japan, it's clearly one of the best places in the world to live. You have, it's maybe the third largest economy, but there are just so many things that I don't think anybody wants to change in Japan, other than maybe Kit Kat flavors. I think the sushi is the best in the world. The trains run on time every day. There's, there's so many things that I wouldn't want to change around, living in Japan. That said, there's also, some really tremendous opportunity. And specifically, if you look at Japan's productivity, it's the lowest amongst G7. And within that, if you think about what Japan's economy is made up of, manufacturing is actually only a small part of that. The service sector, tertiary sector, is 70 to 80% of the economy. And 99.7% of businesses here are small, medium-sized businesses. So just to kind of give a little bit of a kind of context to where Japan might have some opportunity. We thought that while Japan's service quality and multinational may be among the best in the world, it's incredibly inefficient. And I think within services, which is a very broad sector, we've particularly focused on local services. So from finding and hiring a personal trainer to a photographer to home services, right? The age-old question of why is it so hard to hire a plumber, right? What is a fair price for your custom needs? And honestly, I don't think any country has truly brought this sector online yet. It's one of the last large consumer sectors to truly come online. Even in the US, you have multiple billion-dollar players. You have Thumbtack as a unicorn. You have Home Advisor with $1 billion of revenue. But nobody has, word of mouth is still 90% of the market, right? It's still quite tough. But within that, Japan is definitely a laggard. So I'd say that, Japan has really talented professionals all across Japan, but they're relatively hidden in the market. And within that, surveys have shown consistently that small, medium-sized businesses in Japan, their number one challenge is how they can get new clients. So our view is that if we can bring them online, we can bring e-commerce to services for the consumer and create a fair and efficient market for pros to grow their business. And that's what we've set out to do. So you could kind of think of us as Yellow Pages 3.0. Unlike the US where you had Craigslist and Yelp and small businesses came online, in Japan, you don't have that, right? So we're in a somewhat unique position to leapfrog still completely offline professionals to a relatively modern solution. So some of you may know, but one of the largest consumer sectors yet to come online. Japan alone, estimated around $200 billion US, with 97.5% offline. In terms of our traction as a platform, so we launched in 2017 and we focused on acquiring demand. Every year as a startup, we try to think, how can we grow 10x, right? And there's many parallel worlds where we do and where we don't. But at the very beginning, we focused on SEO. We figured out how we can grow demand without having to spend a lot of money to do it. And then in 2018, demand grew, but our supply didn't grow in parallel, as you can see on the chart. And so our biggest focus in 2018 when we raised our Series A was saying, hey, we have all this demand on our platform. How can we grow our supply side? And we really struggled because there was this gap in the market between really high quality supply, but people's ability to kind of sell themselves and market themselves wasn't the same as it was in the US. So we really focused on the supply side, and we pivoted our business model at the end of 2018 when we realized this wasn't going to scale as well as we thought it would, into this algorithmic matching platform where professionals don't have to bid on jobs independently. We're a lead gen business model, so somewhat similar to Thumbtack or Home Advisor in that sense, but we automated that for them, and then it was very easy for pros to use. And so in 2019, our supply side 10x'd. We figured out our unit economics, and now for the first time in 2020, we feel like we're at the start line. And that's kind of why we were able to raise our Series B last month. So I mentioned we built out this automatic matching. So the idea is that, we're Japan's leading lead gen platform where pros are basically bidding on jobs, but they'll set up matching criteria and they'll say, hey, I'm interested in these types of jobs. And if you have somebody who meets these criteria, please send them this message on my behalf. And it's just, this is just kind of a little bit of an illustration of, how well this has grown for us. And just, it's very easy for the professionals to use. The professionals are not as aggressive in terms of growing their business as you would have in the US. You don't have the same, and a culture of hustling as, although maybe Masa down in Osaka, there's a little bit more of that. And in New York, is one of the things I always miss is that vibe and that, in that hustle. But in Japan, again, very high quality service, but not as aggressive in growing and building it out. And so for us to build a way to automatically match people just worked really well. So just to kind of summarize our biggest problem, consumers are searching for local services at the same rate as the US when you look at online search traffic. But plumbers are still using fax machines is the reality. And that's not an exaggeration. Like we still use fax machines in Japan. So the best way for us basically to add more value as a platform and ultimately monetize better is to register more professionals and set up more algorithmic matching. So our vision, what we kind of imagine is, what could be done if all service professionals are online with clear pricing and schedule availability and profiles and reviews and verified certifications. We can basically bring transparency and efficiency to the entire market for both sides, use AI to match demand and supply, but really just kind of bring disintermediation to the services economy and 10x productivity, fundamentally changing how people live and work. So, we think this is all a matter of time and largely possible with technology available today. And that we're kind of best positioned to accelerate this reality. But there's nothing easy about it. And this is what we're very focused on. So this last team, the team. So we're a pretty experienced management team from very different, diverse backgrounds in different industries. And we've come together to focus on solving this problem. Personally, as I mentioned, I'm an engineer by background, worked in Japan for the last 12 years, 8 of which in finance, where we're learned kind of how to build more global products at scale with finite resources, and also been in kind of rebuilding a sales org as a sales trader. So the entire management team has experience kind of, starting or co-founding a company or kind of taking through some pretty intense times and know what I think in Japan, a lot of people are very talented, but don't have experience in startups. So it's been helpful for us, for me as well. And last thing I'll say is that our kind of horizontal marketplace is just a start. I have pretty ambitious plans. And, while we've just closed our current round, plan to grow fast. Build up the future of this platform in Japan. So I'll stop it with these slides there. Thank you. Hopefully that made sense. But we can spend the rest of the time explaining anything that we like.
Yeah, there's now we're open for Q&A, and this is the fun part, right? Anybody want to ask the first question? Or have any questions? I can't really.
What services are most popular?
Yeah, good question. So it's actually evolved, especially during Corona. We've seen that services have changed a lot. So it's been really interesting to watch. And I think the insight that we have to the market as well. So we had a lot of requests in like lessons in wellness, like people looking for personal trainers, people looking for yoga instructors and piano teachers. And then when Corona hit, we had a lot of people that were then looking online, right? So I'm saying actually the gyms are closed. And so now I want to find somebody, who can actually come meet me in the park or do an online lesson. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And one of the benefits of our platform is that it's completely customized. It's whatever the demand side is looking for and whatever the suppliers are able to offer. But beyond that, like one of our first most successful categories, like our early adopters, was with photographers. So that was, around 4,000 photographers nationwide in Japan. It was one of our, first categories that even before we automated the platform kind of worked well. Oh, sorry, my kids are awake and making sounds in the background.
Oh, they sounded
I thought one of us is unmuted.
I might go into the kids' room now. They have the best room in the house. Excuse me while I move. So that kind of evolved from lessons in wellness to from events, and events obviously is what took the biggest hit for us with Corona. So people weren't looking for DJs and MCs at the same rate that they were looking at before. And so, excuse me while I just relocate. You can still see me.
Yep.
So, but on the other hand, one of the other large categories that's been growing quite quickly is home services. So if you imagine you're looking for a plumber or an electrician, or you want to redo your toilet or your bathroom, there's, these are some of the, higher GMV jobs, and I think more valuable jobs to the market. But especially as people were working from home, people were realizing, okay, I should probably fix this thing that, that's broken, or kind of install something, or make this a bit more of a living, a more enjoyable space to live in. And so home services have been growing quite nicely for us through the Corona period.
Got it. I have a friend that works at Thumbtack, and I remember he was saying how in the US, like a lot of people need help assembling their IKEA furniture. So I was like, oh, I didn't know that segment is as big as it was. Sorry, I'm like asking a bunch of questions now.
No, go for it.
Yeah,
I mean, if
sure.
anyone else also has a question, just feel free to jump in. Yeah.
Okay, I think one.
Yeah. Did you actually move to Japan? Like, have you completely moved, like shifted to Japan, or how is that?
Yeah. So I've been living here full time since 2008. So after I graduated from university, I came out here. Been living full time ever since. And yeah, it's been great. Like the not having the stress on just like day-to-day things is wonderful. Obviously, I do miss some of the the elements of the States, but going back once a year for a couple weeks is more than enough. I think that just kind of thinking about some of the things like last time I was back in the States, give somebody, go to buy something at a convenience store, they give you the wrong change. You have to be like, hey, what's going on there, right? And I'll always be on very high alert, and just like the default behavior is someone's trying to rip you off. Whereas in Japan, maybe I'm getting ripped off every day, but never have to, worry or think about it, right? The person is there and happy and balances your bag with you exactly so you can hold it. Just very, very little stress for day-to-day things, which is nice when you're trying to focus on the things that matter in life.
So did you actually like decide on making this business? Like, was the business idea first, or did you move to Japan for personal reasons and then come up with the idea of the business in Japan?
Oh, yeah. So I've been living here for 12 years, and we started Zehitomo, like the idea of the company around 4 years ago. We launched it 3 years ago. So I was working here first in finance for around 8 years before deciding to start Zehitomo.
Cool.
Yeah.
Is it okay if I ask a question?
Sure.
Okay. If you haven't already, do you plan on kind of expanding like cross-border? In other words, whether, obviously if someone has to clean the apartment, you can't do that cross-border, but with a lot of the other kind of, let's say, tutoring services or other stuff, a lot of it sounds like it could be, done by people, both on the, I guess, the service provider side and the people who need the services that could be kind of cross-border. Are you thinking of going there, or a few of your customers are already doing that, or how's that?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and definitely there is opportunity there. I think that by nature of most of our services, by definition of local services, it's services that you meet like in person and physically do. That said, there's a lot of things where, especially this day and age, maybe for a plumber, they can get a video tour first right before doing it, or a lesson, like an English teaching lesson could be done, from somebody overseas. And so there definitely are those opportunities there. But when we think just from a focus perspective, and I think one of the biggest learnings that I've had doing Zehitomo is where do we focus each year so that we can kind of 10x.
Right.
For us, the synergies of doing something in Japan and growing the business domestically is just much larger. And I think the same thing goes for trying to grow the business overseas, right? If the value of being able to hire a plumber in Tokyo and a plumber in France is not so many synergies, same platform maybe, as it would be to maybe use the same professional in Tokyo or the same consumer in Tokyo for another service or for another requester. And so I think just the market is so large and there's so many different entry points. There are some services that offer overseas, like for example, Skype English lessons, right? And so instead of us trying to target the people that might be, professionally on their side, if you've built a Skype English lesson platform or class, some of those companies register on Zehitomo as English teachers, right? And so they say, hey, if you're looking for, and so like for us, we just want to bring transparency and efficiency to the market. And so if you're looking for an English teacher, maybe you want to have somebody who can meet you at the nearby cafe, right? Maybe you want to have somebody who can teach you remotely overseas. Depending on your needs, we'll try to make the right professionals. But yeah, the majority of our professionals are actually small businesses that register.
I see. How do you promote yourselves? Social media, or I haven't been living in Japan for the last 2 years, so I didn't even know about your services. But how do you advertise, so to speak? Yeah.
So I think one of the things with local services, and I think the same thing in the US, is that even if you have billion-dollar businesses, it's been very hard to build a brand. It's like, if you buy something, you go to Amazon. If you need a service, you go to, right? Like I think, companies are working on that and further ahead than here, but there, in Japan hasn't been a big brand since Town Page, right? Or the Yellow Pages. And there's different vertical layers, different opportunities there. And so, but what everyone's doing is instead of they're opening the Yellow Pages, they're going to Google and they're searching, right? And I think it's very hard to change consumer behavior. We would like to, but it will clearly take us time. And we realize that before then, the bigger challenge for us is to solve the pro behavior, how we can help them come online to grow their business, because that's where consumers are searching. So what we've done is we've basically invested a lot in SEO so that when the consumer searches, if Zehitomo comes up on top, that's the most kind of natural process. And that's how we do all of our demand to date.
I see. No TV commercials yet.
Not yet.
So Jordan, I have a similar question, but how about on the professional side? How do they find you, or like how do you convince them to join your platform?
Yes, yeah. So, obviously a portion will come in organically from search. A professional might search similar keywords as a consumer. So a consumer, if I'm looking for, top 10 photographers in Tokyo, as a professional might be looking for photography jobs in Tokyo, right? And so you might be able to, we get some organically via that, but we do spend, the only marketing that we do right now, primarily is towards the professional. And so we do recognize that, this is where we have an inside sales team as well, and a success team, whose job is to basically help the professional transition online. And so that's where we're spending a good amount of company resources. And again, we've really shifted our company focus from trying to be a platform for the consumer, right? As the beginning, it was like, yes, like it would be great if I could just one click and get something done like I can on Amazon, right? The Amazon of services. But we've really kind of shifted to become more of a platform for the professionals. And so that's where we focus all of our marketing and sales efforts right now, is helping these small businesses and freelancers transition their business online. And use us to grow.
Well, sort of back
Go
on
ahead.
that. I guess when you initially first started, you must essentially is a marketplace, and so you must have had a chicken and egg problem. And what was the initial chicken and egg problem, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, we had to overcome it probably several times, maybe still overcoming it in some ways, but at different kind of, category and area pairs, right? If, there's a lot of photographers in Tokyo, but there's not enough, belly dance instructors in Osaka maybe, right? So it's a constant balance, but, what we found was that, SEO was really a good natural way for us to do this. So the way it works is the more professionals that we have on our platform, the higher we can rank and more demand that we'll get. And so we won't get demand in an area where we don't have any supply, basically, because we won't have a landing page there. If you search, Zehitomo won't come up. And so we only basically open up pages where we do have supply. And so to that extent, a lot of it is, okay, can we get the supply first? And kind of focusing on building out the supply. That said, the demand grew much faster than we expected. And so for, I think I showed the chart earlier, but our we had some supply and then demand just exploded. Even though not all that supply was able to meet all that demand. And so, SEO basically is what we did to solve the demand side, and now to solve the supply side, that's really where we built out the sales and marketing the last year or so. And the other thing that I'd add is that we also built in a freemium model. So when we added in our algorithmic matching, we realized that we need to be a platform for all the professionals in Japan, right? We weren't going to, we weren't gonna be able to monetize everybody from day one, and that was fine. Again, the belly dance instructor, maybe there's not so many belly dancers in a certain area, right? And trying to monetize those few professionals might not be the most, efficient use of our time and energy. And maybe if they stop using the platform, people will make a request, not get any responses, and that would be the worst experience. And so we built out a premium, basically where everyone can get started for free. Everyone can kind of come online and build out their profile. And then only in categories and area pairs where there's competition are we really monetizing. And that allows us to kind of focus our sales and marketing resources so that we can kind of, focus on growth. It also means that people who can come in can still have a good experience, even if we haven't monetized there.
All right.
So to summarize, SEO to solve the demand, freemium to kind of solve the supply.
Good.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Can
I ask you another question?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
So as a user of TaskRabbit, one loophole I discovered is that if I find, a service provider that I really love wants to get me to go back through that marketplace to find the same person, because I could just grab his or her like private number and just go from there and never go back to the platform.
Yeah. Yeah, no. So great question. I think that's one of the hard things about, local services. And in Japan, the majority of other players are similar in that you take margin in between, right? And so, you're going to collect, 20% or whatever it may be. And from the, pro and consumer side, was like, hey, like we've met, like, why would we need to continue to pay for that? And a more extreme example would be like our lessons in wellness. So a personal trainer, right? I do a first lesson and do a second lesson. Why would we pay some other platform? And so our business model is lead gen. And I think that's one of the reasons that, Thumbtack, even though TaskRabbit had maybe a much larger brand than Thumbtack, Thumbtack's valuation was, 10 times that, right? In terms of just the size of the jobs that are getting done, the scalability of that model. And so, while TaskRabbit was, I think, eventually bought by IKEA, or as you say in Japan, IKEA, which is always weird. The size of the jobs, and also just kind of being in between, unless you're able to kind of tack on that transaction to like a purchase, for example, then if you have your go-to people, then you kind of lose some of that need. And so just to summarize, the way that our business model works is that the professionals are paying for those leads, and we can basically estimate the value of that, right? So if you think of it as marketing, right? If I'm going to send out like pamphlets, or I'm going to do advertising in a newspaper, or I'm going to, postings, or even I'm going to do online ads on Facebook or Google, Zehitomo, it's like very targeted, where you're reaching somebody who is interested enough to answer 10 questions and put in their personal information. And so if you think of it as just very targeted advertising, it's the most cost-effective channel. Also, by the professionals paying to send that message, it's a very natural quality filter, in the sense that consumers are only going to get back responses from professionals who are interested and available and qualified for the job. So that, together with the reviews and everything else. And so basically, to answer your question, we expect that they will work directly afterwards, but we also know that the majority of our services are really long tail services. And it's not like you're going to hire a plumber every single day. But for lessons and wellnesses, on average, you're going to hire a personal trainer maybe 7 times, right? Sometimes you're going to give up after, the student will give up after the trial lesson. Sometimes they'll continue for years. But we price that in. We price that in. And so we know that, for the personal trainer, if they're going to get hired on average of 7 times, then this is how much they should bid for that job, and making it competitive from that front.
Got it. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Thanks.
We will have someone who hasn't asked, and please go ahead.
Hey, Jordan. Good to see you here.
Hey. Good to see you.
So I'm changing gear a little bit. So can you tell us what it is like to be a startup founder in Japan compared to what it is like in the US? I mean, good or bad?
Yeah.
Both.
Thanks for the question. I haven't been a founder in the US, so I can only kind of imagine or kind of relate to my friends or from when I visit. But, I think just being a foreigner in Japan, you have different, positives and negatives, right? And I think you have a little bit of the unique factor. I think you're able to open up certain doors in different ways. But at the same time, it not being your native language. I do the majority of our, business, all of our fundraising in Japanese. And so, able to kind of communicate at that level, but it's different from being a native Japanese person with that built-in network already there. And so I find I'm able to open up doors easier, but maybe my partner or our sales team is able to kind of go through those doors and kind of work and close that business more effectively. And so I think it's all just comes down to kind of knowing what your strengths are. And I think the other thing in terms of building a culture in Japan is that while many of the things that we do may be obvious in Silicon Valley, they're not here. And we try to take the best of both cultures, Japan and Silicon Valley. And that makes us a unique culture. And I think sometimes just having that slight edge in your culture can be a very big game changer in terms of building out your business and scaling. And I think that's quite attractive for us when we're doing recruiting. But also it allows us to not really just be caught in the traps of this is how every other business in Japan does it. And allow us to kind of be a little bit more kind of creative to take risks and also kind of lean on a global network that we already have. Maybe the only other difference would just be like the fundraising in the US versus Japan. Engine is quite different. And I think in Japan now we have a lot more capital There's a lot of, early stage capital, and there's a lot of kind of pre-IPO capital. There's not as much, but a growing amount kind of in between. But not as many, investors that have, built billion-dollar businesses themselves, right? Not as many people that have actually, been an entrepreneur and gone through and now being an investor. And so a lot of the time it's, more, finance background investors. And that's why a lot of it is kind of lined up to the IPO traditionally, right? And the ongoing joke that Series B in Japan is an IPO. And so that's starting to change, and I think for the better, but Japan is definitely still has a long way to catch up with the US when it comes to a lot of that more, a lot of that thinking in terms of, hyper growth and not just kind of going into a small IPO, but really building out billion-dollar businesses.
Makes sense. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Can I ask a question related to the fundraising? Like, so I'm a Japanese lawyer working for a Japanese law firm, assisting a VC firm and startup company. And, I'd like to ask you kind of the technical thing about fundraising. And, or have you ever noticed any struggle or any differences between how startup companies would get funded in the US and in Japan? Like, I feel like you may, I feel like there are a lot of differences in terms of the norm or deal terms in fundraising by preferred stock. And, if you had anything feeling struggled in fundraising, I'd like to ask you what these things would be like. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for the question. And maybe actually from your position, you could actually maybe have a better view of what exactly is different in the contracts. But I think, we've been fortunate to have, nice globally minded investors. And so I think, we still have, we're still in the Japanese market, and we still kind of follow the norms here. I think, for example, I think it really comes down to the exit market, right? And so investors expecting that it's going to be an IPO, right? Even at seed stage, most investors are going to be like, your exact plan going into IPO, right? And that is, I've never had an overseas investor ask me that. And so I think that as such, usually, it's preferred participant shares, right, in Japan, given that your expectation is that's an IPO. And if it's M&A, the M&A market is, is developing. And I think, hopefully there'll be, more and more kind of larger success cases there. But usually if you do M&A, it's like a smaller exit, and that's not really what the, the investor was going for at the beginning, or the founder was going for at the beginning. And so, I think that's just like one example of maybe why, usually in Japan it's preferred in participating, for example. But I think that there's also, founders are maybe not well educated anywhere, but I think especially in Japan, I've heard lots of stories where founders are not very well educated on terms of what is normal. And you get, hard term sheets from people in finance that do know that. And so I think that, usually startups, you don't afford, expensive $300 an hour lawyers all the time, but for checking your term sheet, I think that's one area, where we've consistently made an exception. I think is important just to, to know what you're committing to. The other big difference in Japan that comes up a lot is this idea of the founder being liable, right? And where where do you set that, right? And I think that's usually kind of like a big negotiation point, but like by default, if for a lot of founders, if you don't negotiate anything, you're just liable for everything that could go wrong. And so I think that's also made it a lot harder for founders to start companies, right? It's not like if you fail, you want to be in a lot of debt. And so, while failure is a little bit more, embraced in the US, maybe even a little bit too much in some cases, I think that in Japan, there's this idea of just kind of like cutting losses and kind of moving on to the next thing and then back in the next thing. It's really I've heard a lot of stories from investors who are just instead of focusing on one and helping that one grow 100x, maybe we would just focus on making sure this one company doesn't decrease in value, right? And spend a disproportionate amount of time on kind of that firefighting and making sure that value goes up, even if it's going to be a very small or flat exit. Whereas if you think about it from a risk return perspective, the law of powers has become so famous in the US. It only really makes sense to invest in something that's going to give you, 100x return if you've had that before, right? And that kind of thinking hasn't really transpired as much here.
I see. Thank you.
And sort of just picking back on that, why do you think that's the case there? I mean, is it because they have not been able to succeed in previous investments in that way, or there's just not enough investments going on? I'm sure there's certainly enough money to invest, and I guess why do you think that that's the case?
Sure. So I think it's a combination of what I was mentioning in terms of it being the IPO market as the normal kind of standard exit. And again, you can IPO here with, what would be a Series B valuation in the US, quite consistently. And so, I think, just the expectations that, hey, you should be going to IPO, but also just in terms of the, I don't know if it's the pride, but for VCs or for, to raise a fund, you're basically looking at your track record. And I think in the US, you're saying, hey, here's a few winners that paid back for everything else. But the more companies that you can have that said, hey, they IPO'd, I think it's also, maybe it comes down more to kind of the risk reward benefit. And I think you should look at it, if you look at it purely from a numbers perspective, it makes sense to just focus on the biggest side reward. But I think there's a little bit of risk aversion in Japan compared to the US. I see a lot of nodding right now. And I think that also comes down to saying, hey, we don't want to lose any opportunity here. We don't want to lose face with saying, hey, I committed to this investment and then it failed. And so I would rather just have a very small exit. And for a lot of investors, if they're able to kind of have, on average, it's a few X, return, that's good enough for them to raise their next fund. Right, for them to have the confidence of the LPs or the investors in their fund, say, hey, they powered through and they were able to deliver returns on all fronts, and then for that investor, it's much easier for them, instead of saying, hey, we look like this volatile machine where we had one or two winners, maybe that was just luck, and we had all these other losers. Even if that means higher returns, I think that can be seen as a little bit more risky. For investors, but the whole point of startups should be risk. So. Go figure.
One perspective I have, which I'm curious if you agree to, is a lot of VCs are funded by corporate, and then someone who is in charge of that investment basically rotate every 2 or 3 years. And then also a lot of money is coming from CVC. Someone who's in charge of CVC is the same. Basically, they change, they got replaced 2 or 3 years. What they fear the most is the value goes down. And by nature, they don't really care about the capital gain. That's not what these shareholders would care about if you're a corporate at a public company. I don't know if that's the case. That's kind of my hypothesis. That's, I'm trying to validate.
Thanks. Yeah. So I think that, there's definitely, I think there is a lot of CVC, there is a lot of corporate money. There also are a lot of, VCs. And so I think, there are different, structures on both fronts. But at the end of the day, I think, where the, compensation structure for, founders is maybe not exactly the same, like in terms of the, the downside risk in Japan versus the US. I also think that more, on the VC side, like you should carry, right? So the people that are involved and in charge of the investments, they have their incentives lined up as well. And I think a lot of the time that's not the case, which I think is a shame, right? And on the corporate side, of course, if you're gonna be rotated every few years, then it doesn't really make sense to have it. But then at the end of the day, it's like, okay, so what are you doing? Like, what is the job of that? And, for CVCs, there's different purposes, right? And lots of the time, maybe it's just going to be information gathering, right? Or you want to have insights into kind of what's going on in your sector. Or you want to have the optionality down the line to maybe be able to make an offer for a company if you decide to invest that way. Or, half the VCs probably, require some sort of, strategic alliance to go forward. And so I think there's, multiple different, things that CVCs look for. But yeah, that's definitely, I think, so definitely a part of it. And the idea from a founder's perspective as well, like if you're going to have an investor and that investor is maybe going to change in a couple of years in terms of that relationship and whatnot, it also is definitely, a point that you think, right? And if you want, taking money from that, like, why are you taking money from that company? And, we've had, a handful of corporates that have invested in Zehitomo that we're very happy to work with. But it's either because we have a clear kind of strategic alliance, or because we have commitment from the very top, and it's usually the CEO that's able to make that investment decision, even if maybe the tanto or the person that you communicate with on a daily basis may change after a couple of years. I'm not sure if that fully answered your thought, but
yeah, it did perfectly.
So there are questions in the chat. Maybe I'll just read it out to you. What do you think? What do you think was the key that investors decided to invest in your company?
So I think at maybe the early, like, each stage is probably a little bit different. The early stage, I think it has to be the team. Like, people were taking a risk on it. And obviously, we have to check several boxes, I think, when you're looking for investment. And so it's like, okay, is there a potential of, 100x upside? Is there a potential of these different things? Does it fit kind of well within our themes of a portfolio? But beyond that, I think it's really the early stage. Our investors basically said, it was like, yeah, like, we trusted you were going to be able to figure it out. It was like, oh, they didn't say that at the time, obviously. But that was, I think, the reality in the early stage. And I think later on now, like with our most recent funding, it's more that we've kind of figured out what we're doing. We've kind of gotten to the start line, and we know how to grow our business right now. And we understand what the inputs and the outputs are. And so it's easier for the investor to understand, if I put in, X $1 million, this is the machine that will turn that $1 million into more money in the future. And having, kind of less assumptions in terms of how it can be translated, and understanding kind of clearly what the risk factors are that could lead to it being translated into a higher number or not. So a little bit vague, but I think to the extent I can stay on a live stream about that.
Like, how did you find investors in the first place? How did you find the investors in the first place?
Yeah. So I think at the beginning, so we also did, like, friends and family round along the timing of our first, round with 500 startups. And so 500 actually worked with, so Coral Capital now, but 500 Startups Japan was our first investor. And I actually knew both of the co-founders, both the heads, so James and Yohei. I worked with both of them previously in finance. And so Yohei was my doki, right? We, been together for several years. And James I actually met on a ski trip when I was, when I was still kind of, we're both younger in our career. And when he was starting up his own company, we're kind of hearing about his stories and, talking about, talking with like lawyers and like kind of figuring things out, being a foreigner, trying to figure out how to open up a bank account for a company, and all the different challenges. And so I'd known them actually both for a while. And so when their fund was being announced, I was actually there. And I think they were interested and we were interested. That said, because we knew each other, I think we explicitly placed a little bit of a higher hurdle for working with each other, especially with a kind of investment relationship. I don't think you want to just invest because you're friends. I think that could actually lead to quite bad outcomes. And so, they were a little bit more wary of investing us. Like, they, liked what we were doing, but recognized that we were just a couple foreigners, right? We didn't have any Japanese, natives on our team at the beginning when we were first starting full time. And so they actually introduced our first, full-time Japanese sales head, and, saw our traction, and we stayed in touch for several months. And they were at a point where then they were interested in wanting to invest. And so from our perspective, like, we knew the people, and I thought I'd have good, open, frank, relationship. I didn't know them as investors. And so kind of, spoke to other people that they had worked with and invested with. And so I think we just kind of got to know each other a bit more from that professional setting as well. And that was, so that definitely played a helpful role. And then also in terms of a lot of the angels was just people that we had worked with before in finance that I think wanted to be able to support and back us. So both myself and my co-founder realized, you must be crazy to leave finance and start a company, so you must have something that you're willing to do. I don't really understand, but I'm willing to back it, was I think the at the beginning. And so I'd say, like, for people considering, starting a company or whatever, VCs will most certainly do a background check and talk with people that you've worked with, right? So whatever environment that you're in, I think that, those relationships and those networks, whether those people will become investors, those people will become referrals for your investors, those will become your supporters, or somebody that introduces future business, it's really, is really pretty valuable for us.
Thank you, Jordan. And yeah, I have 2 questions more.
Sure.
And the second question is like, what is the most important thing to start up your business, like start up your own business? What is the most the important things to start up business for you?
Yeah, I guess resolve is maybe one of the largest ones, right? And I think it's not an easy decision to say, hey, I think there's all sorts of different scenarios, and maybe in some scenarios it's an easier decision than others. But if you have I started Zehitomo right when my first daughter was born, right? And so went the opposite in terms of risk taking, have a steady job, which I enjoyed, strong career growth. I thought I was going to be there forever. And so when you don't have options and you have hey, this startup or nothing else, then it's not maybe as challenging. But I think many people, the dilemma you face is that you have multiple good options, right? And multiple different parallel universes where you could live out different good options. And so in my case, it was either going to be, a job that I enjoy and able to grow in and has, provides a steady income, especially for my family now that's growing. Versus, maybe something that I don't want to live with regret when I'm older, recognizing that we had this huge business opportunity and a chance to kind of build the future that we want to live in. And I think ultimately it came down to our, fortunately, my wife was very, very supportive, and we thought enough capacity to try it out for a year. And I think within that year, basically for us, it was like, okay, well, we'll either fundraise within a year, or I'll go broke and find another job in a year. It was at the very beginning, but being comfortable with that level of risk and making that leap, and not having too much kind of comfort or padding. Because I think the reality is in that first year, way too much time doing things that were not high leverage, right? And once you're in, you're all in. And my mentality definitely shifted in terms of, okay, how can we grow 10x this year, right? We don't have time to be kind of doing things iteratively. We don't have time to be kind of, figuring out a lot of the basics. At the very beginning, my co-founder and I would talk about things that would be 49%, 51%, one way or the other, right? Some wording that really didn't make a difference at the end of the day. And realizing that it just wasn't, high leverage use of our time and energy. And so, having the resolve to kind of go all in, and to be committed, and you have your back against the wall, right? And you have to find the way forward. And multiple times you're going to have to do things that any normal person would say, would give up, right? And you have to have the resolve to be able to go through that. And I think without that, it's very hard. You have to be very mentally tough at times. But maybe I'd summarize by saying that who start companies are by definition irrational, right? The rational thing to do is to follow the norms of society, and if there's already a structure or a way of doing things, to kind of follow that. The irrational thing to do is say that rational way of doing things is not correct. I'm going to do something brand new that's not normal in the world. So I think bringing that level of kind of craziness and resolve, but you also have to be realistic and make sure you can actually turn it into a business. And so it's a lot of things. I think it's not just one thing, but hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, thank you. And and my last question is, what is your vision for 10 years of Zehitomo?
Yeah, 10 years is a long time. But I think even just thinking out the next 3 to 5 years, we really want to bring the sector online, right? This is the last large consumer facing part of the economy that has yet to come online. And for me, I just think about in 10 years when my kids are going to be a little bit older, right? When how do I want equal employment and fair option to, both my kids are daughters, right? And not everything is necessarily as fair in terms of equal in terms of working in Japan, even though a lot has is being worked on. So what is the world that I want to live in? What is the world that I want for my kids to grow up in, regardless of where in the world they want to work, what they want to do? As an engineer, I want to be lazy. I want to be able to get services done from good people very easily, right? So I want to have the Amazon of services at my fingertips, but I also want to have an opportunity where all the really talented professionals across Japan are able to make, are able to grow their business and make money, not through like a lot of people in between taking a very large cut, but the people who are good at what they do, even if they're not great at marketing and branding and selling themselves, that they can be evaluated for the, for the value that they're creating. And they should be able to make a lot of money directly via that. And so that's kind of the Japan that I want to make. And I think after solving Japan, I think then there's the rest of the world to kind of crack the, it hasn't been solved anywhere. But again, Japan just has this huge opportunity to kind of leapfrog because there hasn't been these other players in between. We haven't had Craigslist. We haven't had Yelp. And so, yeah, I just want to build the future that we all should live in.
That's amazing. Thank you, Jordan.
Thank you.
Toshikazu-san, would you
Yeah,
like to go
thank
ahead?
you. Yeah, thank you. I have 3 questions. What do you think are the barriers or hurdles to start business in Japan for startups from abroad? And the second is, what are the merits to start business in Japan? And the third is, I'm working for the local government, the city of Yokohama. And the third one is, what should Japanese government or local government could improve?
Thank you. For your first question, just a clarification, you said the hurdle for people to start companies in Japan from abroad. Do you mean like they already have a foreign entity and they want to launch a branch in Japan, or foreigners who come to Japan to launch a company in Japan?
Yeah, okay. From abroad, yeah.
The latter, right? So yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to start a company anywhere in the world, right? Going back to the points mentioned earlier, just in terms of resolve and willingness to do it. I think there are some things, in the law. So first, it's become a lot easier to start up a company in the last 10, 20 years, right? You can now start it up without a lot of capital. And so I think, good credit to the Japanese government for getting it this far. That said, there's probably still a pretty big gap between where it is right now and where it is in the US. And so I think continuing kind of on that path to make it easier to basically, open up a bank account, open up, different lines of credit to be able to basically, start up a company as easy as it is in the US. I'm sure there's kind of like things that you could list out that are going to be the exact differences. But specifically for a foreigner, I don't think it's necessarily that much harder. Maybe the only challenge would be around visas. And I think there is like an entrepreneur visa and whatnot. So I actually think it's like a pretty good environment. If anything, from my perspective, from the law side that I would want to change is more around stock options. So the traditional stock options in Japan are all going into IPO. And so the incentives for everybody is just lined up to an IPO. And the investors then are trying to get people to go into an IPO. And there are new structures, but it's not as common to have the normal like 4-year vesting with 25% each year that you have in the US. Building that in Japan is harder, more expensive. You either have to kind of have a Shintaku scheme, or you have to have a which is very expensive for an earlier stage company, or Yusho, or kind of like paid stock options. And so to me, that's one of the biggest challenges around just building out the ecosystem. And the ecosystem in Japan is in its infancy. And I think one of the reasons that Silicon Valley is so great is because you have so many people who are able to make a lot of money on your options, right? Go off and start their own company, and good people attract other good people, right? And so you have this great cycle. But in Japan, people don't have as many options in terms of like the actual equity that becomes worth a lot. The founder stays at the company forever. And so it doesn't really kind of come back into the ecosystem. So I think just kind of developing the ecosystem. There's a little bit of a long about answer there would be, I think, helpful for everybody, not just foreigners. And then the other part of the question was
Merits.
One more time.
Okay, the good point.
Yeah. So I think one actually the great things about starting in Japan is that there's not as much competition as you have in other countries. So specifically, if you look at like China or the US, there's not as many, because there's just not as many startups competing for the same space. Generally, if you have a strong team of people, you're able to do something. You're able to figure something out. You're able to get funding. And so I actually think Japan is one of the best places in the world to start a company right now. For that very reason, right? You have this huge economy, and you don't have that much competition in it. And you have really talented people, and yet the cost of labor is nothing like the US. you don't have as many people that have the scale experience, right? And so people are used to larger companies. You're trying to improve, 15% each year is different from that 10x mentality. But I think, yeah, if the structure was improved to kind of make sure that there can be more, benefits to joining a startup in terms of making the equity easier and more standardized, and not having everything line up purely to an IPO. If large companies can be taking more risk. If I were a large company and had a large cash pile, I would, I think, yeah, you should be doing a lot more shopping. But yeah, I think Japan is great. And it's one of the reasons that we decided to launch a company here. Is so much opportunity for the company and for the people that you can employ, as well as for Japan overall. I think it's such an amazing country, and so many things are already great, but so many things that can really, benefit, from innovation as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So it's roughly 8 p.m. in New York City. I think it's 9 o'clock there, your side, Jordan. And thank you so much. I've learned so much from this webinar. I hope you all have. I think Masa, if you want to switch back to the screen sharing mode, that would be great.
Okay.
But really, this next part is our usual community announcements, which I'm sure you've all heard of before. So this is the part where if you have any announcements to make, please say so. Like if you're looking for a job, looking for a CTO, or have a project or an idea you want to work on, you can feel free to tell us about it. Anybody?
I'll start. We're hiring. If anyone wants to join a fast-growing startup in Japan, we are. I know it's hard to travel or maybe come back to Japan if everyone here is in New York. But for those thinking about coming back to Japan, we are. We just closed our Series B last month, and we are hiring across the board.
And visas too. I mean, I'm sure you just mentioned visas could be a little hard to get.
Yeah, so we sponsor visas for engineers. And I think other roles we require native Japanese outside of engineering. And so in those cases, imagine if you speak native Japanese but don't have a visa, we'll figure that out. But yeah, sales, engineering, leadership roles. Yeah, exciting times.
Thank you. Yeah, and congrats on your latest round.
Thank you.
How can I reach out to you?
You can reach me at jordan@zehitomo.com. So just my name, JORDAN @zehitomo.com. Or you can find me on like Facebook or LinkedIn.
Okay,
thank you. Oh. Does anyone have? Oh, Samir.
Hi. I have a cooking startup, and I'm looking for a advisor in the company, someone who has media connections, an advisor with some media connections. So we were going to probably starting to, maybe raise in the next 2 weeks. And we were looking for someone who had PR and media connections to be an advisor in our company. We are a cooking startup. Does anybody know anyone like that?
Where are you based in?
I'm New York. I'm in Jersey City, but we are based in New York.
Okay, thanks.
So yeah, maybe if you want to tell us how we can reach you, that would be great too.
Sure. It's if you just go like the name of the startup is khalcal.com, and my email address is samir.tendulkar@cal.com. I can actually put it in the chat.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, please do so. Yeah.
I'd say if you are fundraising right now, lots of times the investors will have media relations as well. So for example, when we, with 500, for example, they had a specialized person that was able to introduce us to, TechCrunch and Forbes and all these other different places. And so as part of the fundraising, it might be good to, depending on who the investors are, to ask there as well.
Okay. But does anyone know does anyone have any connections over there? So I can...
Sorry, for me only in Japan. But
we'll work on it.
Yeah. Anyone else before we wrap this?
I have an announcement.
Sure.
I'm Mari. I about a week and a half ago, graduated from a 1,000-hour coding boot camp. So hearing about the engineering jobs is really interesting to me, but I'm starting to explore entry-level junior engineer positions. So, and I would love to connect with everyone on LinkedIn. And if you have any advice or tips or leads, that kind of thing, please let me know.
Awesome.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so and so that should be concludes most of our, I guess, all of our webinar. Yes, I want to say thank you for our main sponsor again, Telnet. They've been a huge supporter of our community for a while now, so we're really grateful. And also, before we leave, we always do this Ippon Jime. Also, if you want to get to the next slide, we can show them what's the rhythm.
Yeah, and yeah, also, sorry to put so many things, but we have a feedback form
Yes.
that we want everyone to fill out. So let me post that. Sorry, maybe someone can say something. Let's see. While I'm looking for this.
Oh, I'll post that. Why don't we go ahead and...
Okay, can you post it?
Yeah.
Okay, so Jen will post it. Hopefully, yeah, you can do right away, because if you don't do it now, you're probably not gonna do it. So we want to hear everybody's feedback.
It's always good to help us make this
Without
session.
further ado, so this is the only part I shine, which I do Ippon Jime with everyone. So this one definitely requires camera on, because otherwise you don't see you doing that. And I also need to unshare my screen. Let me unshare. Sorry, there's a lot of mistakes. Okay. Okay. All right. All right. So it's 3, 3, 3, 1. So 3 claps, 3 claps, 3 claps, and 1 clap.
You should unmute too, right?
Yeah, everyone should unmute.
Unmute, yeah, because then we can hear sound too. And okay, so no rehearsal, we're just gonna do it. Okay. Oteo Haishaku, yo. Hey, thank you.
They're in spirit.
US, Japan, that's lot, yeah.
Everyone was perfectly in sync. It was just audio lag.
I need that, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll have next meeting probably August. Hope everyone stays safe, and good morning and good evening. So yeah, thank you very much.
We'll stay on until if anyone wants to chat.
Yeah, we stay on. So if you want to talk with us, maybe
Thank you.
Maybe you want to say.
The next speaker.
Don't know yet.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Nice meeting you all. Bye. Looking forward to the next one. Thanks for organizing. And Jennifer.
桃岡さん、ありがとうね。
ありがとうございました。Thank you so much for organizing. Jennifer, Marcel.
Yeah, Jennifer, yeah, we used to live in New York, so she's, yeah. Oh, Jenny's gone. Okay.
Have a good night. Have a good day. Bye.
Okay.
I think there's 2 people somewhere. Okay, no.
Kazushi-san.
I think so. Okay, I couldn't find.
Okay. Okay, they lost. Okay. No. So I will stop recording. Stop recording.